2016. I'm delighted to introduce our presenters today. Jasmine Dean is an academic advisor and the instructional effectiveness specialist for our Muskegon campus and has been with Baker College since 2007. Jasmine believes connecting course material to real life allows students to move from theory to practice. She acknowledges that theory is very important, but the practice is theory in action. Heather Capote-Powell is the Instructional Effectiveness Specialist from the Allen Park campus and has been with Baker College since fall of 2008. She believes that we fail our students if we don't make these connections and questions how can we possibly make their education truly meaningful and relevant if we don't make those connections. So it is my pleasure to introduce Jasmine and Heather. Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks, Allison.
Hi.
Okay, so this title slide is just letting you know that the session is to enable faculty members to help students make connections between the course contents, the student learning outcomes, prior courses and future careers, and personal lives. So really just that whole holistic perspective of why the heck do I have to take this class anyway? Both Heather and I have been in your shoes. We are former adjuncts. I started at Baker after leaving K-12 and ended up as an adjunct specifically in developmental math in the very beginning. So even though we are not in that position anymore, we definitely know what you guys are going through when you have to answer those hard questions. You have to make sure that you're making connections.
Yeah, I think that helps us, come to reality on a lot of these topics. And I'm so glad. Thanks for having us both. Glad to be here.
I have a technical question. Right now, I know this is just right away. I'm on the phone, and I would like to have hands free. Should I have a headset and plug it in, and will I still be able to interact in that way?
What I need you to do is call the help desk, and they can walk you through the technical questions right now.
Okay, that's fine.
You can reach them at 810-766-4080.
Thank you. I'll just do it like this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So you can see on the screen the objectives of this 1-hour session that we're having. And in particular, I just want you to remember that everything that you do in the classroom should ultimately be supporting the mission of Baker College. And that mission's repeated for you at the bottom of the slide. It's really our job to make sure that our students get good jobs. So that's why I do what I do. My whole point of being at Baker is to help our students get to that point. So how many of you are from the Ferris Bueller days? Anybody remember this wonderful, wonderful teacher he's just great. I mean, he knows how to teach. I hope you all are laughing, even though you're muted. Please do not do this. These students are so not engaged. There's no way that they're getting any relevant connections. And it's really low-level Bloom's taxonomy. In addition, we need to remember that when we do excessive lecturing, we're essentially removing the student from the engagement part of that learning process.
Well, yeah, and you can really see why here at Baker College we really are attempting to be a learner-centered institution, because ultimately all roads lead back to attempting to engage our students in meaningful ways. Now, you can be sure that our building blocks have been carefully placed. I like the drool.
And he freaks out because he's drooling. So what do we really want students to know? You can, if you read over those 3 bullet points, basically these are some ways you can start to justify why students have to take your course. And this is all the way down to essential math, all the way up to the highest 400 level management human service class. Everything that is in the student rotation, there's a reason for it. It's probably harder for you as a faculty member to express this because I remember when I was adjunct, what I was teaching in my class was most important to me. And at first I had a hard time realizing that my students were in more than just my pre-algebra class. they had 2, sometimes 3 other classes. And taking multiple classes and starting out and then looking at the fact that they've got at least 2 years before they finish a degree, that's a really daunting task for a student to take on, especially our non-traditional students who have decided maybe I should go to college so I can get a better job. And from the advising standpoint, one of the things that I do when I talk to students and they say, why do I have to take this and why do I have to take that, is I really explain that a Baker College degree is from an accredited institution, just like MSU or U of M or Western or any other big name university. Your degree is comparable to and competitive with a degree from any other accredited institution because you're getting the same quality education and coursework as those other ones are. And a lot of times when I present that to students, they understand that we're not messing around. This is for real. We want them to be able to get a job and be in that same playing field as somebody who graduated from a university that cost them 5 times as much.
Yeah, and you know, Jasmine, from the instructor standpoint, many of these necessary foundational connections have really already been well thought out and carefully planned, as you've just mentioned. But I think it's so important for instructors to realize that they still have a lot of room for creativity. And one great thing about our teaching faculty is the wealth of experience that they bring to us from their professional arena. And, you know, we're really counting on each of our instructors to incorporate that professional expertise. And in most sense, I mean, that's why they're here. So we're really counting on those connections.
We also know that some of you listening on this WebEx have come from an education background, and some of you have not. So that can be difficult on whether or not you know how to handle those questions, because maybe if you didn't come from an education background, you have a different perspective than somebody who did, and so your answers might be a little bit different. But really, ultimately, it's that connections are important. So this quote came from the director of the Higher Education Policy Institute, and really, it's on us. Anybody who's connected to the college, it is on us to make sure that the students are really having an awesome learning experience. And awesome can mean many things. It can be getting an A. It can be barely passing with a C-, but really feeling like they've been successful in tackling a fear of a certain subject, like maybe speech class. But I just really feel that this quote just kind of ties in the importance of connections in higher ed.
You know, Jasmine, I just thought of something too. We didn't mention about the chat feature, I don't think. Maybe if you'd like to just pause for a moment, we'll hold our thought for a second. Would you want to sign into the chat and mention your name and what campus you teach from? Sorry about that. We forgot to mention that.
I think Allison said at the beginning. Heather, you're probably going to have to take charge of the chat part. I don't have that on my...
No one signed in yet. No.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll give you... And also, if you wish to have some ongoing dialogue in the chat, feel free to do so. Okay, so back to why connections are so important. You know, honestly, if we fail to make those connections, we will fail to retain our students, especially since we're a career college. Building good connections will help to intrinsically motivate our faculty and our students. It really is the responsibility of the instructor to develop and cultivate a climate for curiosity in the classroom. And I just can't emphasize that enough, the importance of that task. And that's really on our shoulders to get that going, not 3 weeks in, but honestly, first day of class, and trying to get that whole tone set up. If instructors can work at setting the stage for curiosity, then students will naturally build that momentum for needing further connections, and hopefully they get hungry for it, and we want them to stay hungry, which in turn that challenges the instructor and, really gets us digging down into what we love, and that's our field and our profession and our expertise. So hopefully it's they told 2 friends and they told 2 friends, that type of situation that just keeps building momentum, and that's what we really want. At the same time, it's very essential, I think, just to remember that our audience is truly made up of adult learners.
Yeah, even though I know on many of the campuses, and specifically on the Muskegon campus, the average student age is decreasing a little bit. We're seeing more traditional students than non-traditional. But overall, I mean, we're really a college that teaches adults. Mid-20s and higher is where most of our student ages are. So these couple of points right here just kind of show you how adults learn best. If you think of something that you want to learn, it needs to have these things in it. There needs to be relevance. There needs to be a reason to learn it. You need to know what direction you're going for it. You got to make sure that it's going to help you grow personally, not just necessarily to check this box off because you did it, but how is this really going to help me as a person?
Yeah, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jasmine, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow. I just wanted to piggyback on what you're saying, and that I can remember being in undergrad courses where I just felt, wow, I just felt like they may as well have been speaking another language, or, wow, they haven't really related the information to me. And so my interest would fade quickly. So just so key, and it's important. I'm sure we can all remember back to our own education and certain teachers we've had that either were so successful at doing that or not so successful.
I think, too, that it's really important that we allow students, specifically our adult students, to feel free to question us and to challenge us. And instead of being defensive and argumentative, we should be able to say things like, that's a really good question. Let me get back to you on that. Or I never thought of it that way. Let me see what I can find out so that I can better answer you in the future. And then lead up to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
A lot of times, if a student says, when am I ever going to use this in the nursing field, we'll say, you know what, let me go talk to a nursing faculty member, and at our next class meeting, I'll tell you what I found out. And then a really good tip that I found is I really wanted to know when I was teaching what kind of students do I have in my class. And there's a feature in Orbit, and when you log into your solar system on your class list, that you can actually see what program a student's in. You know ahead of time what kind of mixture you have. So you can really tailor some of your lessons or some of your comments around that. So let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. If you log into your Oasis and go to the class list, this part right here, I think it's about a third or a fourth column down to section list with photos. And when you view that, there's a column that says email, UID, phone. So here's a couple of examples of some students that I, by FERPA law, got rid of some of the revealing information. You can see that this gives me an idea that I've got associate, certificate, and bachelor level, and I've got a mixture of health sciences, business, and early childhood. And this is just a handful of some students on the class list. But it really gives you an idea of the degree level, the program area, and the intensity of the kind of connections you need to make. So maybe somebody who's at a certificate level doesn't need as much of a specific explanation as that BSN, the bachelor level of nursing student, who needs to understand why cultural diversity is essential to becoming a nurse.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a fabulous tip, and it also allows us as the instructors to have some time to kind of put some things together, too. And I think in the past I've probably done this, probably first class session, honestly, Jasmine, but then I haven't really followed up or done what I should with it. So I love the idea that this kind of gives me a little prep time.
Yeah, another thing that I would do is if, I have that challenging student that always wants to ask me a question or comes up with something unique, if I have a printout of this, I can just quickly glance down my list and realize, John Doe is in a Bachelor of Management, so I need to make sure that I really tailor my questions or make my connections to him so that he can see why this is important in the management field.
So then you're even dealing with classroom management there, which is awesome.
Right. Yeah, and you can even tailor make your groups. If you want all of your group projects to be in similar career fields, this is a good way to create groups. Or you can mix them up. You can say, I want to make sure I don't have anybody in the same career in the same group, so let's mix them up based on what career they're in.
I love that idea. And I like how you've mentioned about the intensity of the connections needed, because that's exactly what we're talking about. Why focus on something that's not going to be meaningful, or why keep discussing a profession that doesn't really apply to anybody in the class? So, yeah, you're just going to pass on that enthusiasm to the right people at the right time. So that's great. Just out to our audience, can any of you think about how grouping students in this fashion may actually change up group project requirements or individual task responsibilities within a group? So feel free to post your answers in the chat feature.
And what we really want to do is we want to kind of analyze how our students consider the student learning outcomes. How are they presented with them, and how do they even know that they're important?
Okay, that's true. And can students really explain and or convey the SLOs of the course in their own words? And I think that's the key there, in their own words. So sometimes it's great to read, dialogue and language presented by the college, but is the student able to express what that means in their own words from their own understanding and from the point of their own understanding? And then more importantly, how is this fostered, emphasized, and nourished by the instructor? So, you might want to let them work to make these connections. Let your students even struggle a little bit, because I think in that struggling, they'll remember those connections and why they're so important, because they struggle to make them. So a little bit of tension, a little bit of struggle is perhaps a good thing, because they're likely to remember those connections and how important that they truly are.
Yeah, and then something else that I always suggest, this is something I practice pretty regularly, is that first day of class, after I've gone over the syllabus and I've gone over my class expectations, I have them look through the student learning outcomes. And it doesn't matter what class it is. It doesn't matter if it's something, math or English or teacher prep course or marketing. But the students need to be able to read through the student learning outcomes. And what I like to do is I like to say, I want you to make some notes on your student learning outcome sheet and write a couple things about, hey, this is one I have no idea what they're talking about. This is one that I already have done this in my real life. What the heck does this mean? Oh, I can't wait for this one. Because a lot of times students, when they know what they're going to do ahead of time or what they're expected to learn, they might look forward to that. And then what I do pretty regularly, and this is really helpful in a math class, is we can pull out the student learning outcomes every couple of class meetings, and I will say, this is how I show my accountability. Let's go through these student learning outcomes and see which ones did we really hit already. Which ones have we missed, and why haven't we gotten to this one? What do we need to do to better understand that one? And then I do that about midterm and then at the very end to make sure we've gone over all of them. And when you regularly visit those SLOs, you're really modeling to your students that desired outcome is important to you, that you value what they're supposed to learn, and you're respecting the fact that every student is expected to complete the course with these outcomes. You're acknowledging that it's your responsibility as a faculty member to meet those outcomes in your teaching methods, not just in your assessments, but how you teach and what you teach. And you're sharing the responsibility with the students and showing them that it's a team effort. And I know it might sound really simple, but this is a really true modeling of what workforce expectations are. Think of any job you've ever had that requires some sort of output. You probably had a plan to get there, and you probably reviewed that plan regularly to make sure you're right on track.
So true. It's so true. Getting back to our prior question before we continue on that same thought, Jasmine, did anybody have any thoughts about when we group up students in our class in this fashion, when we think about their majors and their programs, how does that change up projects?
We have had a lot of privately posted items.
Oh, okay.
They're just coming to me, so I'm going to chime in here.
Okay, great.
It makes the groups, somebody had commented, make the groups more relevant to the students' field. Another one, this grouping could help in developing test exam questions. In speech courses, if students are in similar discipline groups right away, they are comfortable with the topic and therefore more comfortable when imparting knowledge when speaking. And those are just a couple of comments we've received.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how you could even separate tasks within a group just based on those findings and where people are really rich in their understanding. And I mean, it really could make for a dynamic group process. What other creative ways can we foster the uncovering of student discovery, of course, SLOs? And I think it's important, and Jasmine mentioned a couple times about, going back, tying back to those SLOs. It's so easy to forget to do it, and in your mind you're doing it, but just, making sure every 2 to 3 weeks you're making sure you're doing that. Actually, this practice is also a form of formative assessment. And I don't know if we said that formally already. Jasmine already kind of talked about that. And this is where both the instructor and the student can actually start looking for gaps. And that's so important that we point out that students understand, even in their affective domain, where the thoughts and feelings and all of those important I am resources are, that they do understand, okay, here's the SLO, here's where I stand now. You do think about that important formative assessment process, and then how do I make a connection to close that gap? And of course, it's the same thing for the instructor. So the instructor's constantly looking for those connections to make sure those connections are strong. If not, then of course, it's time to change up the teaching. And it's time to readdress and maybe even on the spot change something up so that you are making those strong connections. Let's see. I guess that was all I wanted to mention there. I know what I wanted to tell you. Also, when you think about those SLOs, and we know from our AIM training through the curriculum category of our AIM training, it's a great time to mention big ideas and essential questions. When you agree, Jasmine?
Yeah, that's an advantage to having a UBD course, the Understanding by Design. That's, some faculty members might look at it as kind of taking away some creative freedom. And really, the advantage of UBD courses is every single student across the whole entire Baker College system is expected to meet the same outcomes by using some of the same assessments. So that's pretty standardized. But you have freedom to teach those outcomes, and then also that learning plan that you look through, your student learning outcomes are already laid out for you. There's no guesswork. There's no trying to figure out, am I going to hit SLO number 2, 3, and 7, or did I miss it? Because they're laid out for you. You really know what direction you're supposed to go, and so it helps you with that creativity, that instructor freedom to be able to reach those. You just know which one you're teaching to.
Yeah, and I think Jasmine and I were talking about this earlier, that every once in a while we will hear instructors kind of complain, like, the course is UBD, so those assessments are already done for me. I don't even need to worry about those. But honestly, how you get your students to those assessments and the process and the activities and the learning experiences that you bring to them in order to get to that formative assessment or to that summative assessment is just vital, and it's in your hands. So there is still room, as Jasmine's saying, for creativity.
Coming from a K-12 background, the state-mandated testing, I know a lot of my colleague teachers would be really upset. Oh, my gosh, we have to study this test. And I never really worried about it because I always felt like if I'm teaching my students the material, they should be able to take the test. I'm not going to teach to the test. I'm going to teach to what they need to learn. So that's really something you got to remember about the UBD courses. And there's a couple of ways that you can take even a UBD course and really make some good connections with what students really want to hear from you about how am I ever going to use this or why do I need to do this. And that's along the lines of looking at course alignment work.
Yeah. Okay, so I definitely want to recognize our colleague, Dr. David Hulkren from the Baker College Clinton Township campus. And he kind of designed this course alignment worksheet. Jasmine, could you go to that link for us? So just kind of keeping in mind the same things that we were just talking about, making those strong connections through assessment and learning experiences, you can see how this particular alignment worksheet could help us in our preparation and can really instruct us to how well are we doing with a variety of different learning experiences and assessments, and how well are we making those connections. How strong is the SLO in terms of its connection with the cognitive domain and the level of thinking, critical thinking on Bloom's. So if you can see here, just on this worksheet, you would just go ahead, and there's an example provided for you on our screen. You can see that we've got our SLO written in that first box of the table. And you can see we're looking at the verb. The SLO tells us that we need to evaluate ourselves as students as a potential entrepreneur. And then we are going to look at Bloom's, and in a moment we'll show that just to help you remember about Bloom's, we look at the verb evaluating, and that helps us decide in that SLO where we need to be with our students in terms of our learning experiences and our assessments. Where do we need to place that learning experience? So is it just that we want students to remember information, or are we actually at the very top of the critical thinking skills, and are we in creating? Are we asking them to synthesize and create? So you can see then we've got assessment that we are currently doing. We're giving multiple choice questions related to a completed SWOT, and then we have our learning experience. And then on the last portion of this table talks about a possible alternative assessment method. Now, the way this is designed, not only are we looking at Bloom's, Jasmine, will you take us to the next screen? We'll just have a quick refresher about Bloom's. So there's our level, our higher order thinking skills, of course, at the top, and then lower order where, remembering, you're just kind of spitting back information. So always kind of keeping that in mind. And I know maybe this sounds silly because I think that sometimes instructors go, really, you think I'm going to carry this stuff around? Well, ideally, that would be great. But honestly, if you could just kind of keep the SLOs, the verbiage in the SLOs, and what we're really asking students to do, and then think about, okay, now in my exercise, in my learning experience, in my assessment, where does that land in terms of how I'm asking them to think? And then if you need some help coming up with some new ideas or some fresh material because you're finding maybe your assessments, your formative assessments maybe aren't working that well, if we go to the next slide, we can see that we have, and this comes right out of our AIM training, our types of assessment matrix. And I wrote it down. I think it comes from assessment tier 1. Am I right about that, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's from assessment tier 1. And what's so helpful there is I can look down the left-hand side. Will that become larger for us, Jasmine?
That's as big as it'll be on my screen.
Okay. Again, it's supplemental materials from assessment tier 1. But if you look down the left-hand side, it gives us all the examples of different types of assessment. And in the middle, it gives a description and then talks to us about whether it's formative, summative, and then the knowledge on Bloom's level, where it lies, and how to make some changes. So types of assessment matrix helps us to make a very strong connection to those SLOs. And I think the key here, and what we're trying to emphasize, is you want to make sure you're providing a variety of different types of connections at a variety of different levels. Jasmine, you want to throw in a few things?
Yeah. Just so all of you know, we're going to send out to all of you who have registered for this a copy of these slides, so you have all these links to these documents and these resources. But that course alignment worksheet, it can really help you kind of analyze your course, especially if it hasn't been redesigned for you in a UBD format.
Right.
Really make sure that you're aligning your assessments to the SLOs. And assessment can mean anything from a quick paragraph on their way out the door to a true project, essay, final exam. But it can help you kind of make sure that you're looking at all different levels of the higher and lower order thinking skills. Because in some cases, that low level remembering, I need to remember fact and recall immediately, similar to a spelling test, similar to medical terminology, those are important. Those are some foundational skills. But in addition, we need to be able to take that and evaluate it. I know when I think of MedTerm, when I'm watching a show that has anything to do with medicine or hospital or whatever, those actors are saying lines, but they sure do sound like they know what they're doing when they're applying those medical terms to whatever's going on with that patient. And in addition to that, when you look at the assessment matrix, when you guys are able to see the actual full page of it, you'll be able to see if I do this kind of assessment, am I going on the lower end of this Bloom's taxonomy or the higher end? Am I having enough variety? Am I really getting as much as I need to out of these students so that when they're faced with this kind of real-life problem in their job, are they going to be able to attack it in the same way?
That's excellent. And, I mean, for instance, just piggybacking on what Jasmine's just saying, multiple choice tests or those types of assessment be very different from simulations. and what that's asking of the student in their thought process. So what we want to try to keep in mind is we do want to get all over Bloom's, right? I mean, we want to have that variety, but we definitely want to push students up into those higher level domains as much as we possibly can. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jasmine.
I was just going to say about, when we look at multiple choice and short answer, the traditional stuff, we too need to keep in mind, depending on the field that the student is going into, some state or federal or certifications, licenses, that's what they're going to face. They're going to take a multiple choice class, so they need to test. They need to know how to do it, but they need to be able to do more than that, because if a nurse is trying to help a doctor save somebody's life, it's not going to be A, B, C, or D. It's going to be application of that theory.
That's so true. Yeah. Another final reminder, we want to make sure that we are remembering to use activities and learning experiences that help, that also use a variety of connections. And what I mean by that is you can sit in a classroom and watch a class session and really see who's interacting the most with the material. Is it just the instructor who's really having the best experience for the majority of time that you're observing with the material? So they're interacting the most. What we want to make sure that's happening is that it's not just the instructor that's interacting with the material, but it's student-to-student interaction with material, that it's student-to-instructor interaction with the material, so that we get a variety of ways of people interacting in the classroom. The more we can do that and emphasize that, and that's sometimes hard. You have to kind of step outside of yourself. You have to do some reflection. You have to spend time really thinking about, who was really doing the work in the classroom the most. That's not to say you can't lecture. And I don't ever want to make someone feel you can't lecture. But the more we can get students involved in uncovering their learning and get involved with making their own connections, the better we're going to be doing our jobs.
Yeah, I know that it's hard for us as teachers to kind of release control. That's our little castle there, our little soapbox we get to stand on and really make a difference in the world. We have total control inside those 4 rooms. So to release that control to students and have them do a little bit of the teaching and the thinking is sometimes uncomfortable for some people.
It's fun to be the coach. Fun to be the coach sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm a true believer that students really learn by teaching other students. I love telling somebody to turn to somebody next to them and tell them how to do something or what they just learned. And I just like hearing what they say to each other, because if they feel safe to learn in the classroom and to talk to people around them, it's just amazing. You don't always realize what they've gained from you and from the interactions with students until you hear them talking about it.
Sure, yeah.
So then we got to keep in mind Baker is a career college. There's a reason for why we're doing what we're doing a little bit differently than other colleges. And we really need to make sure that we're highlighting real-world applications of knowledge and skill. This is a really good quote that I pulled from another resource. And I really think that taking those course assignments or assessments or projects and putting it in a real-world context is super important. Maybe in the marketing class, you might want to use a real-world industry case study. Have students practice some marketing principles by solving some complex or contextualized problems that are related to the actual case, and maybe even compare what the results were. Maybe something that's happening right now. What do we think is going to happen next week in this particular marketing situation? The first thing that comes to my mind is the new iWatch that's out. Is that going to be a big thing, or is it going to crash and die? When we look at information systems, maybe assign a project. This is really good in like a 300, 400 level class. Assign a project for building a database for like a nonprofit or community organization, and students can really work within authentic constraints and interact with real clients. Not just, this is what you do on page 27, pretend that this is your data. You're actually working with people and doing what you would do if you were an information systems person out in the real world. And even in those theoretical type things, it's really hard sometimes to tell somebody why they need to understand a certain math concept. I mean, I love math. I could do it all day long. It's just fun. It's because you get the answer, and it's controlled and it's correct. But you could do something, as simple as telling a student that solving a system of equations where you find on a graph where 2 points cross over, sometimes that's where a business will determine the profit, loss, or break-even point to, how they price a specific product. So there's relevance to everything if we can just connect it to what they're going to do out in the real world.
Excellent. Good examples. Very good. I was probably that math student. Why do we have to learn that?
Because I said so.
I hear that from my own children, and they're both in high school, and they'll come home, I just don't get why I need to know trigonometry. And I always think, oh, boy, what a great way to stretch your mind, though, and it's going to come in handy.
They don't dare say that to me because I know I'll tell them why. Talking about asking questions, students ask really important questions, but we need to be asking those questions too.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think if it's more meaningful to us, we just naturally pass that on. If we see the direct meaning of it and we understand the importance of it, especially in our professions, because that's typically where we're teaching is right smack dab in the middle of our own profession, then it just makes sense.
I am sometimes jealous of the faculty members that are teaching at night after they've spent all day at work, and they're not in the education field, they're in the health science field, or they're in the business field, or whatever. And I'm so jealous sometimes of that real world experience that they can bring in. So I'd like to talk to them often and get their opinion so that I'm not saying something wrong. Here I am, this teacher, and I think I know what I'm talking about. But if I ask somebody who's in that field, and then those experts in the field can ask the educators things as well. So sharing the information about why these connections are so important. It's we just have so many wonderful people teaching for us that can just share.
Right.
Instead of closing that door in the classroom, go find somebody and ask them a question.
And don't you think it's so easy to forget when you're ensconced and you're in it and it's your whole day during the day that you might even forget that these folks are coming to you, from a whole different perspective, or, they don't even have their toe wet yet, in the field. So it's so easy to forget to really make those connections. It may seem basic, but honestly, it's so important. We provided. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Oh. Okay, so we provided some important questions here just to keep in mind when you're doing those kinds of projects, as Jasmine had just mentioned. It's important to ask questions, and really try to consider who might provide the answers to these questions as well. It's not just you. It's not you that has to do all of that work. I mean, obviously but really make the students work to answer these questions and to make those connections.
Especially if you're teaching a general education course and you've got some students who kind of already know what their field is going to be like. Maybe you as a Comp 101 teacher don't really know what somebody needs to do with a writing skill, but I bet you that most of those students could probably come up with something, and that's a great way to get them to take responsibility for finding out, why do I need to know how to write correctly in the management field?
And it's funny, I see right here somebody posted a little bit earlier. It says, I think it's important to make connections between SLOs and real-life situations and skills needed in their profession as we go through the course material. Yeah, that's so true. All right, well, and speaking of connecting to the profession, again, these connecting ideas can be the job of the instructor or the students. And all of these suggestions could be the result of instructor or student searches, student examples. Obviously, the instructor can bring those in, but we want to make sure we charge our students to maybe even find guest speakers or real-world examples, or to charge them for looking for things in their own communities that connect to their profession. Get field scenarios and that sort of thing. Interview somebody from a profession. Charge them with that. Let them go out and find let them do a little bit of research in their own communities. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my personal experience, and I'm working on my doctorate right now. I'm almost done with it. And what I do purposely is if I have an assignment that I can relate it to something I'm doing in my everyday job, I'm going to jump on that right away. I want it to have relevance. I want to make sure that I'm not doing something that's quote unquote fake or unnecessary. I don't want it to be random. I want to find that value in it. And that's like what Allison said about earlier, where I really believe in taking theory and putting it into practice. So that practical application is what we really need. And I think that that's one of the things I love about Baker is that we do a really great job of focusing students on the career skills and the knowledge that they need so that they're successful when they graduate. We require every single student to have an internship. Some of them have more than one. Some have more than one clinical rotation. By doing that, we're not just saying, here's what you're supposed to do, have fun. We're really making them see the importance of being in that field and doing the work, not just doing the assignments.
Yeah, I think those practicums and those types of experience are just essential. I just love that we have that we do that. I can remember having friends back in college that didn't have those practicum experiences and literally ended up by just staying in school forever, it seemed, trying to find the right fit.
Another thing that we got to make sure we're doing is that we're connecting students to the current research out there. It's part of the reason why it's really important that you pay attention to what you're loading into Blackboard. And I know, Heather, when you and I were talking about this, we talked about the library research guides that our ARCs or learning centers have. Did you want to say something about that before I went on this part?
Oh, no, you're fine. Go right into it, because that's just where I was going. Yep.
Yeah, so so when Heather and I were talking about, how can we get faculty to understand that we can have them connect their students to current research, I don't know how many of you know this, but our librarians are amazing. They have spent so much time putting together research guides for basically almost every course or program. They've got articles, websites, videos, you name it. It's one click and it's all there. So I've got some screenshots to show you. If you go to the main library research guides page, then you'll see that there's all these different subjects. You can also click on class guides or program guides, depending on what you're in. And then what I did was I picked criminal justice for these screenshots. So this is a CRJ 106 Introduction to Corrections. And you can see that all this stuff is on the home page. So they've got some stuff on legal issues. Ooh, I see a misspelling. We might want to tell them that. Corrections process, corrections officer role, all these different topics here. And so then if you were to go to the corrections officer role, there's some articles that you can have your students read. There's some e-books that they can look at right there online. All they have to do is use their library card number, and they have instant access to it. Here's a video that talks about the use of force. Then there's some other films on demand down here at the bottom that are available. So those library research guides, that work is done for you, and you don't have to spend that extra time looking for it. You can even ask a librarian if they will come up with a research guide for your class if one doesn't exist, and they will work on it for you.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent advice. Not to mention you can do some consulting with, your toe-to-toe, with folks that are working in your ARCs.
Yeah. And that's another way to really connect our students to the outside world.
Yeah, and don't forget, these experiences, if we really truly want them to happen, of course, they likely need to be mandatory. So, keep that in mind. Maybe you can work it into a project. That's always helpful. Maybe a field trip, make it mandatory so that they can start happening. Make sure to put the onus on your students. What connections, again, can they make to the outside world? Let them think outside the box. And even outside, maybe into their future professions. I think that's so important. I know I saw somebody here writing in our chat box that they use discussion board to have students make connections of SLOs to their career. And, we have that course management system. I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but how essential it is to be asking those meaningful, good questions in discussion boards so that discussion boards don't just become kind of benign, but that maybe they are really meaningful to students, where they're really kind of out there trying to get some good information. I was telling Jasmine earlier when I was teaching Writing 115 at one point, I had students go out and look for it, and it had to be in their profession, but what was all the different types of writing that they would be expected to be able to do and know in their field. And whether that be charting, whether that be the ability to use Excel, Word, Google Forms, whatever that was, what was the type of writing. So you can even kind of gear some of your projects, to those making those strong connections for students.
Yeah, and you were talking about making some things mandatory. I think sometimes as a college faculty member, we need to remember to kind of put ourselves in the eyes of being the boss, and our students are our employees. So if we kind of put ourselves in that mindset, what we tell them is necessary to do for the course is probably something that might be necessary for a business or a company or institution or whatever, to complete that kind of task for it to function. It's a daily kind of thing. So, not completing those assignments or not doing those outside of the box kinds of things, it could be almost like not doing your job. And I really like to use those, why do we have to do this kind of thing, as really emphasizing that professional work ethic, that sometimes, that's just what we have to do. We have to get through this horrible piece of red tape or this complex kind of thing to get to what we really want to happen and to be able to celebrate that success and go on to something else.
Okay, yeah. And so it's really key, of course, that we try to keep in mind our students' perspective, just as Jasmine was just saying.
And really think about the frame of reference that they come from.
So hopefully you like how many people do remember the electric typewriter there? I think I learned on that.
I learned to type on one.
So did I in the sixth grade.
All of these.
You used all of these, yeah, me too. Oh boy. So instructors, really, it's our charge to build relationships with students. And I know sometimes when I say that, instructors will say, but there's not enough time, but we really need to foster that as much as we possibly can and layer that and build that into our class time spent toe-to-toe with our students in order to understand how we can appeal to them and to create the kinds of connections that are useful and meaningful specifically to them. Not to mention that'll automatically help us differentiate our instruction. So the quicker, the faster we can build that rapport with those students and really understand their perspectives, their frame of reference, the better off we are. The other thing, we kind of mentioned it earlier, I believe Jasmine mentioned it earlier, how important it is to have that instructor-to-instructor communication. So it's important to ask instructors in your department about students who are about to enter your class. So, for instance, you might, if I'm going to teach Comp 2, I might go to the Comp 1 instructors or maybe just, email them and sort of ask, okay, what are you noticing about students coming in and or talk to the dean, see how students did and what are the needs of those students as quickly as possible so that you can kind of be, ready, ready and prepared to be forearmed, right? Find out, there's some other helpful information. Jasmine and I were just kind of creating a list here the other day. What are the prerequisites for this class, if there are any? What gaps might be present for students entering this course? What are the current strengths of this group of students, test scores, projects, and group work? So any of that you can find out is always so helpful. Is any remediation necessary? Now, we've done that on our campus in a couple of our health science courses, where before the term even starts, we've got a tutoring class of students where we're trying to provide some remediation. So when or even really just to emphasize and help them retain information before they get into the next level of that course. I just think that is so key, and maybe we need to develop that more in our campuses. What are the professional background experiences of these students, the vocational goals of the students, if possible, the age range, where did their prior schooling take place, and let your findings guide your instruction and even the way you may set up your groups. So again, because we do so much group work, again, there's another consideration for you. All right? So establishing those relationships quickly is key.
I think, too, sometimes we'll find that students either they may have been placed correctly by testing or by previous courses, but maybe they don't feel comfortable in what they're in. And I really like to spend those first 2 class days kind of assessing just informally where all my students stand, and I encourage them to let me know if they feel like this is just too overwhelming or just too much, or maybe even just too easy, because it's within that first week of the quarter that students have a chance to be able to go and meet with an academic advisor and, maybe find out if they were misplaced or if they want to, step back and maybe they placed into a college level math class because that's just where they placed, but they don't feel that they have all of those skills to feel comfortable going through that. Maybe they want to choose to take a pre-algebra class first. Or maybe, they tested into English 101, but they have no idea how to write a thesis statement and they really want to have that extra remediation. Or, I've even had some students who are placed in a class based on their ACT scores, which they take in their junior year, which most of them don't really care about what the scores are until they decide, yeah, maybe I do want to go to college.
Right.
Times, between that junior and senior year, they may have been able to successfully gain the skills necessary to not have to take a certain course. So they need to have that chance to maybe, recompass or reassess what's happening and maybe go to a higher level. I had a student like that a couple of quarters ago who was in an introductory to algebra class, and he was teaching the guy next to him. He should have never been in that class. He needed to go right into Math 112, and he aced the class. He was so bored. But his ACT score from 2 years before or whenever he had taken it, that's where he got placed. Since then, he had learned those skills.
Right. Well, one of the things we probably don't talk about as much as we probably should, and that's just our cross-curricular opportunities, the cross-curricular competencies, and just trying to emphasize scope and sequence. This comes from the curriculum, the AIM training curriculum training. So I don't know, if you get a chance to look back at that, there's so much helpful information in there to us as instructors, just to realize that we want to be mentioning scope and sequence. We want to be emphasizing to students, remember when you learned this already in AMP 1. and just sort of, provide those reminders and give them those opportunities to retool. Maybe give them even 5 minutes to retool and think about, oh, yeah, that's right. Give them a chance to pair and share and then get right back on board. Sometimes we maybe just fail to do that. We want to make sure that we're providing those opportunities. I said I had an example here about between Comp 1 and Comp 2 because there's certainly things that you have to master in Comp 1 before you get into Comp 2. And again, that instructor-to-instructor communication, maybe even surveying the class a little bit before you kind of get into some hardcore argumentative writing. If they don't know how to write a thesis, you're in trouble. But obviously they should have mastered that. Maybe they forgot, or maybe, as Jasmine, I like your perspective because, maybe they had Comp 1 a long time ago. So that could present a problem.
Students who have taken like 5 or more years off and they come back, they get to keep that Comp 1 grade, but maybe it's been so long they don't remember how to do APA format, or that was when we didn't require APA. Maybe they learned MLA.
I had a situation happen to me real quick between SPK 201 and presentational speaking, where I had a bunch of students, and they told me, this was 5 years ago. I don't remember how to organize main points or anything about. So we held a little quick tutoring class, on the side. We invited all the students, and that's the kind of thing that can really help folks get retooled and geared up.
Yeah, and it keeps them on that path that they're supposed to be going without having them totally miss, your whole entire course.
Yeah.
There's connections that you can make when we talk about cross-curricular. We can go back and forth between general education courses. Like, somebody asks you, why do I need to write in math? You can give examples. The math journals that some of the classes require, it kind of leads back to research skills. And math is necessary in management. Sometimes you have to write research reports or board reports, and it has to have some of that math to be able to interpret and explain what the data means. When you're taking a speech class, English is just as important in speech because you have to write your speeches out. INF 161, Technology and Society, is full of writing. It is not an introduction to computers course. Psychology requires all the papers to be in APA format. INF classes, I get questions all the time. Why do I have to take all these computer classes? Every single job description says Microsoft Office skills. Every one of them I've seen. Communication now is via email. Oh my gosh, if we can't communicate correctly in our emails, we have some major problems.
Right.
And then we can talk to those program directors and other program faculty specific, like, for example, the medical assisting program has a math for health occupations. That instructor expects that all of her students can do some basic essential math functions. The OTA, Occupational Therapy Assistant program, the research that has to be done in some of those OTA program classes falls back on how did I do research in Comp 1 and Comp 2. Speech class for vet tech students. Number one thing that our advisory boards say about our vet tech students is, they're great at working with animals, but I need them to be able to talk to the owners of these patients. If they can't relate the stuff from the doctor back to the owner, that's pointless. And then just another thing that just happened recently, I had a vet tech person here on my campus, a faculty member, come to me and ask me to just review a paper that she had written for a presentation. She had worked, she's a practicing vet also, and she had worked on a research project with I guess from California, this big food science company. And so she had to write a research proposal, a summary of what she had done before she goes to present it. And to be restricted to certain guidelines was just almost intimidating because that's not what she does every day. So even professionals who have been doing this forever, they still have to go back to those basic gen ed skills.
Yep. Well, I think, we got about 3 minutes left here. I just saw in the chat that somebody teaches A&P 1 and 2, and they created a Throwback Thursday. I love that.
Yeah.
And then it looks like it's an interactive PowerPoint. That's awesome.
When you guys get a copy of this, I found this is about 2.5-minute video clip, 10 things employers want from a new hire. And I was really impressed because it's stuff that we require, and specifically our gen eds. Communication skills, honesty and integrity, teamwork skills, interpersonal skills, motivation or initiative, strong work ethic, analytical skills, flexibility or adaptability, computer skills, and self-confidence. So when you get this, I really encourage you might even want to use this in your classroom. And that leads us to, speaking of computer skills, we don't necessarily expect that you take the data that the CESI, that's the abbreviation for a big survey that we do at Baker. We don't expect you on Facebook and be this Facebook person and interact with your students that way, but consider your discussion board as a type of networking tool that you can use to create really good learning communities in your classroom.
Exactly. That's our own course management system, and what are the most effective ways we can utilize that, push students to quality responses in the discussion board, make sure we're asking quality questions. So that's excellent. We have stick and hang in there, right? Does anybody else have any other ideas for the Blackboard course management system, other besides discussion board, what else they may use to get those same results?
Dead silence. Does that
Oh no, they left us.
I was thinking maybe Wiki, Jasmine.
Oh yeah, our nursing faculty uses wikis as their course evaluation tools.
There you go.
Or clinical evaluation, sorry.
Clinical evaluation. Yeah. How neat. That's neat.
For those
Journaling.
Of you who are on, just a reminder for those of you who are still on, we'll send you an email with all this information.
Okay, somebody just wrote journaling.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's very good.
There's a blog on Blackboard you can use.
Yep. That's good features. All right, well, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jasmine and Allison.
Heather.